Well, things are starting to heat up in Lansing with another session of the Michigan legislature now underway. What can we expect to see in the new term? We'll talk about that and more with State Representative Scott Dianda, starting right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now, here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, State Representative Scott Dianda serves Michigan's 110th district, which includes Baraga, Gogebic, Houghton, Iron, Keweenaw, and Ontonagon counties, as well as Powell and Ishpeming townships in Marquette County. Representative Dianda is beginning his third and final term in the State House. Welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Well, thank you, Don. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
You know, since the last time you were here, we had an election.
Yes.
We've added a new face to the UP delegation. We added a new congressman. We had a new president, and you were elected to your third term. Any thoughts on all of that?
Well, there's a lot of change all the time in politics. You know, we always see a lot of new faces, especially with the term limits, and sometimes in a way it hurts the UP a lot because we lose a lot of good folks.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think back to the good old days when we had Dominic Jacobetti and Rusty Hellman from your part of the country and others who served this area for a long time. You know, before we look ahead, let's just kind of look back at a couple of things that happened toward the end of in the so-called lame duck session. I know that after a couple of years, they finally passed an energy bill. You did not support that. What were your concerns?
Well, my concerns was that we just didn't have a focus for the UP, Don. You know, we need to look at making our power systems up here very independent. And we can see that happening now. We just had word now that We Energies is going to create 2 new power plants, one in Marquette, one in Baraga County. We also see the expansion of SEMCO by putting a $136 million gas line up here to service just a lot of the UP, a lot of businesses, and Marquette Board of Light. So those are the good things that were coming out of this from private industry aspect. And I just really believe that we need to see a better energy plan for the UP where we produce the power in the UP and we put our people to work. That's what's going to take to make a best thing around here and keeps the prices lower.
One of the questions has been transmission, and even though we are building generating capacity, which is vital, perhaps better connection for the UP with the Lower Peninsula? Is that still something you're looking at? Or?
Well, that's something that was discussed a lot, but you know, I just see for what that's going to cost us, and you know, and trying to take a look at the cost of it for the consumers. It all comes down to the consumer and the ratepayer. And if we're going to look at putting a system in place to build a new system across the straits, I can't support that. Not when we can't not look at doing the generation in the UP. I think that we have a lot of power that comes from Wisconsin and Minnesota. You know, I don't think we should limit ourselves to just thinking that we're going to run an extension cord to Lower Michigan. I use the example, if we had 2 homes 5 miles apart and we each had a wood stove, an outside wood boiler, we would not just run one heating system and run a line. We'd buy another system, and I think it's the same principle here in the UP. The economical way to do it is to make sure that we're generating power here locally. It puts our people to work, and we control our own destiny on the power.
Do you expect any new developments this year in that area, or has this issue been pretty much put to bed as far as in Lansing?
I think that the discussion that we're going to have this year with Representative Gary Glenn as our new chair, and I think that Representative Glenn really gets the fact that we need to have the choice and we got to start looking at the systems that are local. He comes out of Midland, Michigan, where Dow Chemical does a lot of their own power systems down there in their community. So I think that, you know, that's going to be the aspect of what we're going to see in the future here in this year for our Energy Committee.
One of the other developments was some changes in speed limits. Is that a good decision?
Well, I voted against that, Don. I didn't think it was very good for us in the UP because I'll tell you what, I'm worried about the insurance rates. I mean, we pay the highest rates around. You know, we are part of a system that has been in place for a long time. We pay very high rates. And I just really never had anybody contact me to say that they want their 16-year-old new driver in the household to start driving faster. So the speed limit will increase by 5 miles an hour in certain zones of the UP. But again, you know, it just comes down to the cost to the consumer, and that's why people send me to Lansing to protect those folks on their pocketbook.
You've had some experience in that area. What do you expect to see here in the UP? The Seney Stretch, for example, is that kind of a prime candidate?
I think that's probably a prime candidate, US 2 in certain parts, but I don't think that we're going to see a mass expansion because, you know, really blessed up here to have a lot of nice small towns across a lot of these state highways, so I don't believe that we're going to see a real big change in a lot of the things. And one thing I was really concerned with too, Don, I came out of the Department of Transportation, so I know the cost of what it takes to change all the signs and upgrade the shoulders and look at changing guardrail and that stuff does not come for free. You know, that's a case of, you know, more cost to the taxpayers, and I'm really concerned about what it's going to do for our insurance rates. Especially the fact that, you know, the UP has a lot of senior citizens out there driving. They probably will not drive faster. So that kind of contends to have sometimes, you know, more accidents than that. We looked at a lot of the rates that these other states have had for accidents, and they have had a big increase in accidents is when they raise their speed limits in Wisconsin.
One of the disappointments was the so-called big box store, dark store legislation was not passed. Is there more that can be done, or where do you expect us to go in the future?
I think what's going to happen in the future is that the counties, as far as an association and the Michigan Municipal League, is going to have to put the pressure on the elected representatives in Lansing. That's the only way that we are going to get the legislation to move, because unfortunately the Chamber of Commerce did not want to see that legislation come through. It passed into out of the House, it went to the Senate. They wouldn't take it up for a committee hearing. I think that they got to start playing hardball. Our communities are going to suffer so much, and the only way it's going to get done is to be able to have the pressure put on the legislature to say we need the legislation, or we have to start reducing our business in the locals as far as our budgets by 15 to 20%. Because these big box stores are going to take the impact on not just our local governments, but also our schools.
Okay. We'll talk about the future and what's coming up after we take this break. Back with more on the Ryan Report in just 2 minutes. Our guest this morning is State Representative Scott Dianda. In that election, the Republicans maintained control in the House and the Senate. You're part of the loyal opposition, I guess. How does that affect how you approach your job?
Well, I approach my job in one way. I always make sure that we are here and stand for the constituents of my 7 counties, and we always have one thing in mind, making sure that we make our point known no matter who is in a position of authority. I always make sure that they understand where we're coming from. I always work with everybody in Lower Michigan in the legislative process, but first and foremost for me is always making sure that we understand where we're coming from up here. So I think, Don, I got a good relationship with both sides of the aisle, and because I'm such a penny pincher on a lot of these issues, I get along with a lot of the Republican colleagues over there.
Okay. And you're going to be serving as vice chair on the Tourism and Outdoor Recreation Committee, an important committee for Upper Michigan.
Yes, I was very happy to get that committee, because what we can do is to be able to showcase not just the UP, but the entire state of Michigan. One thing that is so very dear to my heart is the fact that we have such good businesses up here that really want to be able to grow. And to be able to look at a lot of these opportunities like the Copper Peak, which is over in Ironwood, Michigan.
Right.
I mean, for us to be able to attract worldwide ski jumping is something that we need to do. I think that we see a lot of things across Michigan. We've got the International Speed Track down in Lower Michigan that brings in a lot of people, and we got to bring more people into the UP and Michigan. And I think we got the perfect opportunity to showcase that now, and I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Is Pure Michigan a good thing?
I think Pure Michigan's a good thing. I think the one thing, though, that we need to focus on with that is to be able to get those counties showcased across all of Michigan. All 83 counties should have some access to showing what is their gem in their backyard. So that's one thing that I'm going to have a lot of discussion with in the process, because no matter what county we all have a lot of great stuff, and I'd like to see us showcase a lot of those things to bring people into the counties, because there's certain counties that need help, and a lot of them in the UP definitely need a shot in the arm. We've got a lot of things that are out there for our natural resources to be able to attract people, and the tourism piece is so important.
Okay, let's jump to natural resources. Potentially some good news coming in the copper country. How can you update us on what's happening with possible copper mining ventures there?
Right. Well, we always support responsible mining, and for us to be able to look at again and having a situation like in the White Pine area to be able to start looking at major companies that are investing in that process is phenomenal. And you know, I just been kept up to speed on what they're trying to do to reopen the White Pine Complex, and we're 100% behind them. We want to make sure that people are working up there, and we have such a large amount of copper, we have a large amount of natural resources here, just like Cleveland Cliffs. We have to be able to support those wonderful people that are coming in, like the Eagle Mine, to be able to say, what can we do to assist? We want to have people working. We've got the natural ores here, and we got to be able to do it right.
And you have one company that's really looking at 3 different projects.
Yes, there's 3 different sites with that White Pine Complex. They have one in Kevena County, and there's also one over in Gogebic County. So for them to look at a 3-county area to be able to start up a business and to get people working is phenomenal. I remember the days of the buses that came out of Calumet and brought all the folks down to the White Pine Complex, and just what it did with the economy. So we're really hoping that we can see that come to fruition and have a lot more folks working back there.
On the matter of employment, it brings to mind unemployment, and we've had some really difficult times with the unemployment system.
Right.
Created some real horror stories for some people who the state said they defrauded the system and they didn't, and you know, apparently Michigan has some of the worst penalties in the nation. What are your thoughts on what we're seeing here?
Well, what happens out there is the fact that we just don't have sometimes enough working bees in those state agencies, and unemployment is one of them. I think that we have to update that system. I think it's archaic as far as the software is going. We have people that we've helped in the last couple months that I have heard stories that I just can't even believe. I just got done helping one family home that had 4 of the residents working at the same business, and they've had a lot of difficulty. They were all put up on charges and everything, so we finally got that taken care of for them. But it should never have to happen that the people have to get in that situation where they're not going to get their benefits as they've been working all of those days to, you know, have good employment at a business, and then they apply for the insurance and they just have such horrific stories. It should just not happen in Michigan.
There's some belief that the fraud penalties are too severe, and the legislature should look at that. Do you agree with that?
I do. I agree that this should be looked at. You know, it's the same thing like the voter fraud. You know, they're always talking about voter fraud and the fraud with the unemployment insurance, but, you know, we see very small numbers of folks that get prosecuted over it. So there's some very extreme penalties. And when you have, like the situation that I mentioned, when 4 family members were working at a farm and they all got laid off, which they do at the same time normally every year, you know, they should not have to be looked at as a criminal when they have been good tax-paying citizens of our state. So that's this very disappointing part for me.
Okay, we have to take another break. Back with more on the Ryan Report after this commercial message. Again, our guest this morning is State Representative Scott Dianda. Having kind of a usual winter, I know you've expressed concerns about the fact that there are programs available to help people who may have special needs at this time of year. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. You know, there's a lot of programs through the Community Action that helps the seniors with a lot of their high cost of their heating bills. And I really encourage people to reach out. You know, we've got so many great people up here that worked all their life and they paid taxes and they're just good citizens. And right now with the high cost of fuel and energy, you know, there are programs available, and I always encourage people to, you know, reach out if they need help to contact us also, because, you know, the bills have just been phenomenal. They're very high. I mean, when you start looking at our cost of energy, we're the highest in the nation.
Okay. Problems in the prison system continue. The provider of food service, Trinity Services Group, has been hit with more than $2 million in penalties. Is this system working?
I think that the system is not working. We contracted out the food service to the prison system. I think it was a mistake from the word go. You know, we had people in place. We had all of the systems in place to take care of those food service workers, and we had the ability to be able to feed the prisoners in the state of Michigan for a very low rate. And they thought that they were going to save money by contracting that out. We have had major problems over in the Kinross area. They have had, you know, a riot over there which cost the taxpayers about $1 million, over $1 million now. So the cost has never got to the point where there was a savings. And I think the biggest thing that I'm concerned with is just the security of the facilities. You know, you start getting folks that come in and out there, it seems like they're changing people every week. We hear the reports, and it just has not saved the state any money. So I think that that was something that, on that aspect of privatization, it just did not work. It's actually costing us more money.
Budgets are always a big issue. I know it's early in that process. What are you going to be keeping an eye on this year as the state begins to prepare its budget?
Well, what I'm going to look at for where we start talking about the budget is just kind of what we're going to see as far as the revenue sharing. I think that's one of the biggest things that we are always having a challenge with in Upper Michigan. We've had the problem with the dark stores. We have had people that have taken the loophole to be, in my opinion, to be able to really fleece our local governments. We need to look at the revenue sharing. That got to be a priority for us as the Democrats in that caucus for appropriations, because we've got local government out there that are struggling. You know, in the last 4 years, the budget has went from $44 billion to $55 billion in Lansing in the last 4 years that I was there. That's why I continue to vote no on these budgets, because we do not get the money back to the local economy. It needs to come back to the local. So that's one thing that I'm really going to be focused on, is having that discussion with my colleagues. And I think on both sides of the aisles, even the Republicans would want to see more revenue sharing come back to these communities.
Each year we talk about education, support of K-12 and universities. Are we going to do more for them, or where do you see that heading this year?
Well, I think that, you know, now that we got an independent report out that showed that we're $1,000 per student across the state, we're in a negative on what we need for dollar amount for funding. I think that that will be looked at. I think that that's something that has to change. You know, we all talk about funding education. Well, I think that the discussion is going to have to be a priority to make sure that we have those resources put back into the school districts.
We have an interesting year coming up politically. You're going to be term limited, so there'll be a new representative from your
Yes.
district. Representative Kivala is term limited.
Yes.
And of course, Senator Casperson will be term limited in his seat. What are your plans going forward?
Well, my plan's done. I started a committee to take a look at running for the Michigan State Senate. You know, that's the first order of business when you also think that you're going to run for another office. You know, we're lawmakers, not lawbreakers. The rule of elections is to establish a committee, so I am going to seriously pursue taking a hard look at that seat, on the 38th Senate seat. I have 7 counties of that district right now currently.
One of the things that's worked well recently has been the fact that the UP delegation works well together. You know, is this going to affect that, since some of you may wind up being competitors in the future?
Well, I think we'll all work together because we're all cut out of the same UP cloth. You know, I mean, this is something that, you know, we still got our day job, and that's exactly what I always say. You know, people ask me all the time about running for many different offices, but the one that I'm very much wanting and have the priority to take care of the people of the 110th district. That's the first order of business with me, taking care of the constituents of my district now and working for the UP to make sure that we have the best, strongest voice, and people know that, you know, just because we may have an election coming up doesn't mean we're going to compromise on the UP one bit.
Okay. Thanks very much for coming in and talking with us this morning. Good to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you for the update.
I'm sure we'll be talking some more in the future.
Thank you.
I'll be back with some thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Well, those of you who were here last week know that my closing thoughts concerned some of my issues with neckties. Well, one viewer and a friend liked it so much he decided to give me one of his ties, and a nice one it is. I don't think this week's story will produce any gifts. You know, as we get older, some of us like to tell people how things used to be. So this morning, let's take another trip down memory lane. For most people today, the refrigerator has been a common appliance in their home for their entire life. But it wasn't always so, and I can remember those days. I was reminded of that the other day when I checked out the 90 Years Ago Today feature in the Marquette Mining Journal, which recalled a story from that era talking about the ice business, which in those days pretty much depended on nature. You see, the invention of the refrigerator, or at least primitive versions of what we have today goes back many, many years. But the availability of a modern unit at a price people could afford didn't really come about until the 1940s and 50s. And that's the reason I can recall the icebox that my grandparents had in their kitchen. That's right, it was commonly known as the icebox, and that's literally what it was. It wasn't as big as the refrigerators we have today, but somewhat similar in style. It usually had two compartments. One contained the food, the other a large block of ice, probably about a foot or a foot and a half square, which provided the cooling power. Needless to say, there was no thermostat to adjust the temperature. Now here's the best part of the story. I don't know what they did in the South, but most communities in this area had one or two companies in the ice business that literally cut their frozen blocks of ice from an inland lake each winter. The ice was placed in large barns where it could be stored so they could supply their customers through the summer months. It sounds a little primitive now, but it was a huge operation, cutting and transporting huge blocks of ice to the storage barn, often in horse-drawn wagons. When I go to my refrigerator today, with its large storage capacity, built-in cold water and ice dispenser, and no big block of ice to make it operate, it's almost difficult to believe the way things used to be, even though I was there to see it. Sometimes we long for the old days and going back to the way things used to be. Going back to the days of the icebox is not on my wish list. For years after the refrigerator arrived, some people continued to call it the icebox. There may be still a few of those people around today. Change comes hard for some of us. I'll be back in a minute. Well, time to wrap it up on our first get-together in February. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Keep UpperMichiganSource.com in mind for the latest news anytime. And you can also find this show at that same location. The latest edition is usually available starting on Monday afternoon. Thanks to State Representative Scott Dianda for joining us today. It's always good to know what's happening in Lansing from someone directly involved in the action. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday morning.